Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. My guest this week is FIDE Master Alex King. He is a return guest. Our previous episode was number 23, where we discussed the chess cheating epidemic and some other interesting topics. Alex is also an accomplished musician, and we included a few clips of his original compositions in that episode as well. That was actually one of my favorite interviews. I'm going to link it up in the show notes. I would definitely check it out if you haven't already. Alex was a NM when that was recorded back in April of 2022. And this week we're going to discuss his journey to FM, as well as some other very interesting topics that club players should find instructive. Alex resides in Memphis, Tennessee, and is an active player, teacher, and writer. So Alex, good to see you, my friend. Welcome back.
Good to see you too, Neil. Great to be back here on the Chess Angle. It's a pleasure.
Great. So why don't we open this up by talking about your current music pursuits and your compositions, because I know that's a big part of your life.
Yeah. So, in our first episode, you played a few of my original tunes. I still do occasionally write some tunes on the piano. I mostly just play the piano by myself at home every day. It's almost like a meditative practice for me. And also, as my kids get older, my second daughter was born since our last episode, and my older daughter is 3, and she's started taking violin lessons. So she's doing the Suzuki method where the parent learns the violin along with the kids. So I'm picking up some violin now. We're learning it together. I'm hoping one day I can be like her accompanist on piano as she plays the concertos and all of that. So, just like chess, music, something you can do your whole life. It goes in different directions throughout your life. I'm learning new things, still loving it. So music's going well.
That's terrific. That's awesome. I want to get into your journey from National Master to FIDE Master. Big achievement. And I'm hoping you could speak about that in detail, as far as your studying, how much you studied, what you studied, how much playing you did, the whole process. I'd love to hear about that.
Our first interview, April 2022, was 1 month before I became a FIDE Master. And so that was in May 2022 when I finally got my FIDE rating over 2300. It's 2302, so I just got over the threshold. And so that's all it takes. That's the only requirement to be a FIDE Master, just FIDE rating of 2300. And I had been a national master for 10 years before I finally became a FIDE Master. So I became a national master in 2012. I was 23. And then last year, finally, at the age of 33, I made it. And so, I spent a full 10 years languishing between 2200 and 2300 FIDE. And I was playing a lot during that period. I was playing some FIDE-rated tournaments, but certainly a lot of USEF-rated tournaments. I wasn't lacking for practice. During that 10-year period was the 4 years that I lived in New York, worked at the Marshall Chess Club, was playing constantly against very strong opposition. And yet I wasn't making a whole lot of progress on my rating. And then, strangely, it was only after my first kid was born in 2020 that I kind of started my final ascent up to 2300 FIDE, and then I finally got it. And so, I don't know exactly what to attribute it to. Maybe it was my daughter's fault, that I made this final burst of improvement. Because it's I could tell you what I was studying, what I was working on, but if I was not making progress or visible progress for 10 years. I mean, maybe I was doing something wrong during those 10 years that you wouldn't want to emulate unless you want to take 10 years to get to the next title like I did, you know? But um, yeah, I mean, what finally I feel like maybe helped me make some real improvement is some sort of philosophical changes that I made to like analyzing my games and using the engine, interpreting the engine. And these are maybe some things that we had talked about a little bit in a previous interview. I'm not sure, but I kind of started analyzing my games in a more simplified and streamlined way, where I de-emphasized my thoughts and feelings during the game. And I really started treating analyzing my games as more of like a police report of what occurred during the game, big major crimes and punishments. You know, did I make a move that went from equal to losing, you know, or did I make a move that went from winning to equal, you know, and not getting deeper into the weeds than that, focusing on the big things from each game, but doing that for, you know, all my games. I think we did talk about this last time where I was saying, you know, I play online, I try to learn something from each game, you know, but I think that the only way you can do that sustainably is if you don't spend an hour, 2 hours analyzing each game, then you can't possibly analyze all the games you play online. But if you have a more streamlined, just the facts attitude toward learning from your games, you just try to learn the three biggest screw ups that you and your opponent made in the game, then it is feasible for you to do that for all your, you know, all the online rapid games you play or slow blitz games you play. Of course, I don't do this for my bullet games, but so yeah, I don't know. I mean, it could be that that workflow change in my game analysis helped me make some of that final improvement. You know, another thing that may have helped is that the tournament where I made that final like push over the 2300 threshold was a closed norm round robin at the Charlotte Chess Center. This is a IM norm tournament, you know, where there's only 10 players, you know, there's three invited IMs, and then everybody else pays a big entry fee. You know that all the conditions are pre-set so that if you score high enough, you can get an IM norm. And to be perfectly honest with you, in the past couple of years, I've started to I've started to feel like those closed round robin tournaments are maybe not the best environment for actual chess improvement. They because they're sort of artificially cushy, you know, like you don't have to play any severely underrated kids because they make sure that the rating average is sufficient to produce norms. So you're not going to play any severely underrated people. You know, they're paying the IMs to play in the tournament. The IMs don't have a big incentive to fight as hard as possible and kill everybody. They're just there to not embarrass themselves and get their paycheck and move on, you know? And so, you know, like for example, one of the IMs in that tournament offered me a draw after like 10 moves or something. Like he didn't want to fight me, you know? So what I'm trying to say is that, you know, yeah, I feel like the real test of your ability is if you play in an open tournament with the sharks and the piranhas and the mosquitoes. I mean, that's really like, you know, I mean, a lot of people are taking a beating in terms of their rating in these open tournaments, but I feel like I'm sort of in the mood to play in more open tournaments rather than more of these closed tournaments because I feel like maybe I'm getting an artificially inflated sense of my ability by playing in these somewhat cushy, insulated events. So I don't know. whether that was also a contributing factor to me, like reaching this new rating peak, that the conditions were kind of comfy for me to do that. We'll see. I mean, if I start playing in more open tournaments and I drop down to 2250 FIDE, then we'll know that maybe we were just seeing a comfortable result of my ability and we weren't seeing it under like a true cross section of conditions. Or maybe I'll maintain my ability, my rating, and it'll show that I was this strength anyway. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Um, the reason why it's still an open question is that since I got that FM title, I haven't played any more FIDE rated tournaments in the year and a half since then. And I've not played a ton of tournaments overall. I've been playing a lot less over the board since my second daughter was born a year ago. And so yeah, I mean I haven't played in any big tournaments. And so well, like I said, I mean whenever it comes to the point where I can play in more serious tournaments regularly, I want to go stick my arm in the jar of mosquitoes. I want to go play in the World Open or the US Open or whatever. And if I play a bunch of kids who are way underrated and I take a big rating hit, I still feel like ultimately that's the best thing for my chess development because I'm getting the most accurate read on what my ability is. I don't want to hide from these kids. I mean, I want to face what's out there. So that's kind of my attitude towards it all.
Yeah, that's interesting. The juxtaposition between those closed events and the open events, I hadn't really thought of that. It wasn't something I was aware of. Very interesting. I want to go back to your thoughts on using a chess engine. Now, Alex, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think last time we spoke, you mentioned that you believe that you should just go straight to the engine and just analyze your game.
That's what I do. And that's what I advocate my students to do as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing because I know that some people think you should analyze it on your own first. Others even say that you should not use a chess engine, which I don't agree with. But I also found interesting what you said about looking at your games almost, I guess, forensically rather than looking at your emotions. Now, can you talk about that? Because some of the listeners might think, well, my problem is that I get nervous or I was overthinking. So can you maybe go into a little more detail about how you separated your emotions from just looking at the moves and how that helped?
Right. So, I think that the reason why I don't want to rehash my emotions and my thoughts during the game is the same reason that I don't want to analyze the game without an engine, which is that my thoughts and feelings and what I saw and calculated during the game might be wrong. It might be mistaken and flawed, in which case me rehashing it, and reiterating it in my analysis is just perpetuating my flaws, my mediocrities, my biases, and my preconceptions. It is perpetuating my pre-existing level by doing that. And I think that is something that many, especially adult players, are much too eager to do. They are much too eager to center their own mediocrity in their improvement process, in their game analysis, in what they do in their lessons, and I think more adult, especially adult improvers should have the mindset that they want to recognize their flaws, try to transcend them as much as possible, try to leave them behind, try to strip away the flaws, and replace it with what you should have done, what the truth is of the matter, which the engine helps to provide. Instead of and I find this in lessons too. I'm going over one of my students' games, let's say an adult student, and I say, well, okay, here you blundered a pawn. And they want to say, yeah, but here's what I was thinking. Let me tell you what I was thinking. And I want to be like, please don't tell me what you were thinking. It was wrong. Please forget what you were thinking as soon as possible. And you should be looking at like what the computer said you should do and remember that instead of remember what you were thinking during the game. I mean, I feel like so often we're like practicing it wrong over and over again, even in the analysis, when it would be better to just forget the wrong thought process, the wrong feeling that you had, and just see the right move, and try to remember that. because realistically, you're only going to take away a few things permanently from each game. Only a few things from each game are really going to stick with you. And don't you want those to be good moves so that you might play those good moves next time instead of remembering the wrong thing, the wrong thought process, the wrong emotion, then you carry that trauma with you forward and perpetuate it, reenact it next time as well. So that's why I don't analyze my games without the engine. And that's also why I don't focus on the diary stuff, the thoughts and feelings during the analysis. So, yeah, I mean, uh, forensic is a good way to put it, like you said. I'm trying to figure out what I did wrong and what I should have done instead. And interestingly, some games you play and you find that you actually didn't do anything wrong because your opponent did something so wrong. They hung a piece on move 10 that then you were just winning, and all you have to do is not screw that up, and then you win the game. And then you played perfectly. You did literally nothing wrong. I mean, thinking about things in this way actually opens up this like extreme positive side of the analysis process from a psychological perspective, where it's like, wow, I literally made zero mistakes in this game because it was equal for the first 9 moves. And he hung a piece, and I was up a piece. And then I just didn't hang the piece back, and then I won with my extra piece, and it's played perfectly. I played like God in this game. Would have been impossible to play better than this because I played zero mistakes, that my opponent made 1 mistake. So even a club player who's 1500 can occasionally, sometimes, play a game where they just don't do anything wrong and their opponent does something very wrong, and that's literally a perfect game from this what I call fundamentalist perspective, where you really just treat all moves as either a mistake or a not mistake. So I don't know. To me, this sort of just the facts attitude towards analyzing your games is liberating in a way, because it simplifies the analysis process and it allows you to just separate the wheat from the chaff in the analysis, focus on the important things, and just disregard everything else and move on.
I like that. Ultimately, every chess move is either a mistake or it's not a mistake, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it fits one of those 2 categories. All right. Now, I know you mentioned because of your family responsibilities, you're not playing over the board as much, and that you do play online. I was hoping to hear a little bit about that, how often you're playing online, what kind of time controls you're using, things like that.
Yeah, so I still play online a lot, and mostly I play rapid. First of all, I mostly play on Lichess. I don't really play on chess.com very much. I mostly play Lichess rapid, and my favorite time control is 10+5. Whenever I play like a training game against a student during a lesson, my first pick is usually 10+5. A single 10+5 game lasts 20 to 30 minutes, let's say, and that is enough time to generally play your best, but still short enough, that playing it and analyzing it doesn't take too long. I used to play a lot more Blitz, and I play less Blitz now. I still play Bullet just for fun to let off steam. But if I want to play a serious game, I mostly play rapid, sometimes classical as well. I do like longer time controls, 25+5. Sometimes I play on Lichess. So rapid and classical is mostly what I play online. And like I said, Bullet. I mean, like if I'm holding my 1-year-old, I'm not going to be playing a rapid game because I could be interrupted at any moment. I'm not going to be focused. I'm going to be playing like garbage. And so for that, it's better to just play a throwaway game, like a bullet game. And this is what I advocate to my students too, is to leave room for throwaway games in your playing. I think a lot of students come to me, they feel like they should be playing slower time controls like rapid and classical, but in reality they only play Blitz. And maybe they play Bullet too. But it's like they play a lot of Blitz and Bullet. After every game, they look at the chess.com game review, the automated analysis, And I tell them, start playing like 3 games a week of rapid, like at least 10 minutes, analyze those games, and then once you've eaten those vegetables, eat as much dessert as you want. Play as much bullet and blit and 3+0 as you want, but don't look at the game review. Don't try to learn anything from those games. Explicitly frame them as throwaway garbage, just for fun, just letting off steam games. You'll find that they're more fun if you don't try to learn anything from them. And then you can focus all that actual productive learning energy on the more serious games. And breaking it up into X amount of serious games and then as much random garbage games as you want. I feel like that's worked pretty well for some of my students recently, because they were trying to have their blitz games serve too many functions. It was trying to be fun and letting off steam and learning something from it and practicing your openings, and it's just too much pressure on that. So I think sort of segregating them in that way can be useful. So that's what I do anyway.
Right. And that probably helps a little bit with maybe tilt and not getting addicted and that whole thing. Is that true? Would you say that?
I mean, there's still the potential to tilt on the throwaway games. You could still binge on dessert even after you do fill up eat your vegetables. But whatever vegetables you eat, you know, you're less hungry for dessert after you eat your vegetables. You know what I mean? So it doesn't solve all your problems, but it will help. I think it will help. So.
Right. Now, can I ask why? I'm just curious. You're playing on Chess more than chess.com. Any particular reason?
Well, I mean, it's not like a price thing. I mean, I have a free account on chess.com anyway, because I created some content for them years ago. Uh, but I really just like the design of Lee Chess a lot more. It's a lot more spare. There's not a lot of bells and whistles. They don't try to razzle dazzle you with the bots and the pop-ups and the this and the that and that. Of course there's no ads or anything. But so I just like the atmosphere of Lee Chess better. Although I will say that at least on my level, there are definitely more strong players playing on chess.com. So, I mean, maybe I'm handicapping myself a little bit because there's fewer strong players on Lee Chess. But to me, it's like if I play on chess.com, it's like the site is not designed very well. I can't find things. A little bit slower. The interface is annoying. I have to deal with their latest goofy bell and whistle features that they've introduced. And I don't know. I just don't enjoy it as much. I know that chess.com is a lot more popular. A lot of people do dig those bells and whistles and all those features and all that stuff, but it's not for me. So,
Yeah, you like the nice, clean, simple
yeah.
interface.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, getting back to cheating a little bit, we spoke about this in detail in our previous episode. Are you finding, like playing online, that that's still an issue, or is it occasionally? What do you think? Is some people say, there's like two sides of the argument that it's really a major problem online, and others say that it's overblown and that every time someone's not playing well, they just automatically accuse their opponent of cheating. What's your take on that? I'm curious if there's any difference from when we spoke, about a year ago.
It's pretty similar to my position when we last talked, which is that, I assume that some percentage of the time I'm getting cheated against. And maybe that's slightly unfairly skewing my results, but it's not radically doing so. And even if I do play a cheater, I can still learn from the game, even though I'm gonna lose. I can still learn something from the game. So it's not a useless game. Even it's not a fair game, but it's not a useless game for me either. So I still sort of believe that. I also don't feel like the number of cheaters that I face has increased since we last talked. I mean, it might even have decreased slightly. I mean, I feel like Lee Chess in general does quite a good job of, detecting and enforcing, their fair play terms. I don't know if that's different on chess.com. I mean, I know that chess.com has had a lot of the talk about cheating is about chess.com. I mean, there's a lot more users there. They run a lot more events with like actual prize funds where there's more cheating that happens. Like there's a lot of focus on Title Tuesday, for example, whether people are cheating in Title Tuesday. But for me, just playing sort of like one-off, no-stakes games on Lee Chess, I haven't found it to be a big major issue. Occasionally, I play someone, I feel like they're cheating, I report them, they get banned. You know, maybe I'm not catching everybody, maybe the site's not catching everybody, but overall, it doesn't really cramp my style too much. And especially not when I play classical. Interestingly, you know, recently some other chess players that I know were saying that they would never play classical online because of the risk of cheating. And I mean, I've barely ever faced a cheater in classical online. I mean, if I was a cheater, I would not be playing classical. I mean, it's a very poor return on on your time investment to play classical. You would get so much more results cheating in Blitz or Rapid. You play more games per hour. It's a bad hourly rate when you cheat in classical. And so yes, but I feel like the slower the time control, the less you have to worry about cheaters. So since I mostly play Rapid and classical, I don't know. It's just not like a big thing um, that's infringing on my chess experience. So also, I mean, maybe that has to do with my level because, like at my rating, there's not, if someone's a cheater, they probably would have gotten caught before the point where they reach my level. Whereas like if you're on a club level, maybe you face more cheaters because they haven't gotten caught. They're still too early. They haven't gotten caught yet, or something like that. So
I want to get back to over the board now and talk about rating deflation, big topic, mostly about all these kids who are severely underrated. Basically, their rating is not catching up to their strength. Just wondering what your experience is against those types of players and what your thoughts are on the whole rating deflation issue.
yeah, so I've been thinking about these issues for a while, but I still don't feel like I understand them super well. Like the factors that cause rating deflation on sort of like a macroeconomic level. So, I mean, you know, like if the issue is just that there are more, strong people playing chess now than there were 20, 30 years ago, and that therefore a 1500 rating, means something, means a, it equates to a stronger chess ability than it did 20 or 30 years ago, then I don't know. I don't know if that's actually a problem. I mean, I don't know. Easy for me to say, I've already gotten my FM title, whereas like someone else who's trying to break expert or something, now they have to be 200 points stronger than they would have had to be 30 years ago to make expert or something like that. So maybe it's easy for me to say if I'm not really in the trenches. But I think it, I think that whatever downsides there are to this rating deflation or strength inflation or however you want to frame it, whatever downsides there are to it, I feel like there are pros to it. There are benefits to it. I mean, aren't we happy that there are more people playing good chess now than there was a long time ago? That the overall level of play is a lot higher than it was 30 years ago. I mean, isn't that a good thing? That's kind of cool, isn't it? So, I think I feel like in other sports, for example, I mean, tennis fans are happy that people are playing much better tennis now than they did 30 years ago. I mean, are there club tennis players who are bemoaning ranking deflation or whatever the equivalent is in tennis? Maybe, but uh, they seem to be very happy that like the best players are playing very well. I don't know. I don't know if this is a proper analogy, but all I'm trying to say is that there are good things about this phenomenon, not just that. It's not just a bad thing. And I feel like, especially when you see like the huge boom in chess interest in, let's say, India, where there's like a huge number of players coming out of India. That's where some of the worst underrated player phenomenon is from a country like India, where there's like thousands and thousands of players who haven't even played FIDE rated tournaments yet, but they're already, 1500 strength, 1800 strength, whatever. I mean, yeah, it's scary if you have to like go to a tournament and play some of these people and take a knock on your rating, but like, isn't it awesome that like all these players that there's thousands of new really great players from India? I mean, that's pretty cool. That's pretty nice. So I don't know. To me, it just seems like a rising tide of strength, you know, carries all ships from a certain perspective.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I think the frustration for most people, like they'll probably agree with you about the fact that it's so great that you have all these stronger plays and that the game itself is stronger. But the bottom line is they're like, yeah, but someone might say, okay, they're rated let's say 16, 1700, and they're playing someone rated 1,000 and they lose. So it's like, okay, everything you just said is all well and good, but I just lost like 30 points on my rating to someone who's clearly not 1,000, because you would expect a 1,000 player to not know the opening too well or to drop a pawn right away. And, they're playing like almost flawless chess, at least for someone at that level. So I think at the club level, the frustration is, okay, yeah, that's all well and good, but it's not really fair that I just lost 30 points to someone who's clearly not 1,000, and I'll be lucky to break even, for the rest of the tournament, or it might take me. I think that's what the frustration is.
I do understand that. I do understand that. I mean, it's similar with currency, inflation, deflation. I don't understand those things very well either. But like, I mean, for me, compared to my parents' generation or compared to my grandparents' generation, the cost of living, the cost of owning a house, wages, the amount of my waking hours I have to spend working compared to them, the fact that me and my wife both work in order to support our household as opposed to maybe just like one of us would be working, 70 years ago, and that would be enough to support the family. I mean, things do change over time, and in some ways it's harder than it was a long time ago. On the other hand, in some ways it's better. And so I don't know. Uh, I mean, I just prefer to focus mostly on the positive sides. Maybe it's somehow easy for me to say that, but I prefer to focus on the good things about progress, instead of fetching too much about the downsides. So.
Right, I got you. It's always good to look at the bright side. Just one quick follow up on the rating deflation, and then we'll move on. What do you think about the theory? This has been proposed. I don't know if this was more of a FIDE thing, but it could certainly apply to US chess as well, of giving everybody like a 150 to 200 point rating boost to sort of combat the deflation. Do you think that's overblown, or do you think that's something that's legitimate?
I mean, I don't really know whether that would do anything or not. My like instinct, which is not super educated, my instinct is that that would just wash away like tears and rain, in a certain amount of time. A year, 2 years. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just going to be like dust in the wind, isn't it? Like, is that really going to do anything in the long term?
Yeah, it's like a Band-Aid basically. Like
Yeah.
everyone will feel good for I kind of you kind of stole my answer. I was going to say everyone will feel good for 6 months. And then cuz when they first suggested that, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. And as I'm chewing on it, I'm like, you know what? That's just going to be ephemeral because, it'll feel good for a short period of time. And then it's just, it's going to end up going back to, because if they do it for everybody, it's pretty much not changing anything because everybody's getting that, it's all relative, so to speak.
Well, I wonder whether, I mean, if the issue is that there are more strong players overall, and that therefore it is more difficult to get to a certain rating level. I mean, I wonder if lowering the rating threshold for certain titles might be a better solution, because then it's like, okay, if you're an 1800 today, but 30 years ago you would have been a 2000, then I mean, could we make expert over 1800 now, to sort of account for that? I mean, that seems like it would be a more permanent solution. Again, I don't know. There's probably some macroeconomic problem with that, but it seems like adjusting your interpretation, your expectation, your understanding of the whole system is maybe a more permanent solution than just throwing a couple points here and
Right.
there, you know.
Well, another thing they're throwing around is just instead of starting someone as unrated, like start them at 1400 or something like that. Because then, the thinking is all those, I mean, I'm saying kids, it could be adults, but it's mostly kids who are rated, 800, 1000, 1100, but who really aren't. If you start them at 400, that could combat some of the deflation. But, I'm with you. This is all very vague and amorphous. It's hard to really know until, you try it. But, interesting stuff.
It is interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I'd be interested to see how it sort of develops over the coming years.
One topic I am very, very interested in talking about. You used the term backsplaining in chess. You had written something online, and I'm kind of fascinated by this. So for our listeners, can you explain what backsplaining is and how that works as far as chess analysis?
Yeah, so what I have found is that in chess books and in chess teaching, a lot of times the writer or the teacher will say something like, and here all you have to do is think logically about the position. Imagine like a Jeremy Silman book, the late Jeremy Silman. I don't mean to, rag on him now that he's recently passed, but he is, in my mind, a big perpetrator of explaining, where he'll say like, okay, all you got to do is notice XYZ factor in the position, and that will lead you automatically, algorithmically, formulaically to the right move here. Because of course, if there's a good knight versus a bad bishop and the pawn structure is like this and the king position is like this, then of course it follows logically, my dear Watson, that the right move is knight to c3 here, And I feel like the way that is backsplaining is that they're making it seem like there's this formula, this logic, this deliberate rationality for assessing a position and choosing your move. But that's not the actual way that the person who played that game came to that decision. The person who played that game, that knight c3 move, that is the right move, it bubbled up from their unconscious, from their intuition. It came to them naturally. They would have played it in a simul. They didn't sit there necessarily for 10 minutes doing calculation, doing some big formula or rational thought process. It sort of came to them. It looked right. It felt right. Maybe they did some calculation to make sure that it works. But I feel like backsplaining is coming up with a logical explanation on the back end for something where that logical explanation was not used on the front end to actually come up with the thing. So I feel like this is a very common thing traditionally in chess literature and in chess teaching. And one of the reasons that it is, in my view, harmful is that then if you've got a student who makes a mistake in their game, then they feel like afterward they need to indict their thought process during the game. That if they didn't come up with the right move, it's because they weren't thinking the right thought process. They didn't follow the right rational formula, the right algorithm, and that all they need to do is change their thoughts, and then they will come up with the right move next time. When in fact, generally the case is that if they didn't find the right move, that pattern was not ingrained enough in them, and it didn't bubble up, clearly enough or quickly enough or confidently enough from their intuition, from their subconscious during the game, and that's why they didn't play the right move. And so if that's the real reason why they didn't find the right move, then it won't help to change their thought process, because it wasn't because of their thought process anyway. It's not something that they can fix in their next game. It's something they have to fix in their training. they have to practice that pattern more to ingrain it more in them, you know? Like, it's just like music. I'm on a gig and we play some tune that has some changes that are unfamiliar to me, and I flub those changes in my solo. That's not because of what I was or wasn't thinking in the moment. It's not like I could have been thinking something differently where I would have made those changes. It's because I've never practiced that chord progression before, or I don't have any, licks over that structure or whatever. And I need to go home and practice that tune and practice other tunes like it and do some exercises, get some more ideas. And then I will go on the next gig and play better over that. And it's the same thing in chess. I feel is that a lot of people they 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 don't prescribe enough changes for their training, and they overprescribe changes for their conscious thought process, things that they need to think about different in the next game. And I feel like it overburdens them while they're playing because they feel like, oh, what's the thing I'm supposed to be thinking about differently? This, that, I don't know. They overthink things. They feel more stressed and pressured. They're not relaxed, flowing in the zone as much. And they're also not training hard enough. They need to be focused, thinking, pressure, stress, working hard, feeling the burn in their training, and more relaxed in their game, I feel. So taking this attitude that, like, if you made a mistake, it's just because you don't have that pattern in your muscle memory yet. You need to go home and practice it. Then you just come back and you'll do better next time, or you'll do better eventually. Having that attitude makes your training more productive, and it makes your games more relaxed and enjoyable. So that's, I think, the remedy for this sort of traditional backsplaining fallacy that I've identified.
All right, that's probably one of the most fascinating explanations of chess improvement, and one of the things we need to work on that I've ever had on the podcast. Really, really fascinating. I like that. Now, so backsplaining, it's almost, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's almost like a sort of a chess form of like Monday morning quarterbacking, right? It's like an explanation in retrospect. Like basically you're analyzing a position after the fact with information that you probably couldn't have. There's no way you could have had that information beforehand, but it's...
Or even if you could have had it, you didn't use it to make the decision in the first place. The guy made this move intuitively, and then Irving Chernev came around and wrote some flowery paragraphs afterward explaining the Sherlockian, to come up with it. But that's not what happened in the game.
Very interesting. Now, one other thing along those lines.
Yeah.
You have what you call a null move strategy or a null move hypothesis. Tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so I just wrote this article for the Marshall Chess Club Spectator newsletter. I write a monthly column for them. And one of my articles was called the null move hypothesis. And to be honest, it's not that groundbreaking of a concept. It's really just a thinking prompt, which comes down to what if it were already my opponent's move here. That's what a null move means in computer. When you use the engine, there's a way to essentially insert a nothing move and make it the other person's move automatically. Then the engine starts thinking from the other person as if it was the other person's turn. That's called a null move. And I think it's a useful thinking process in a lot of different kinds of positions. If you're in a complicated sharp position, thinking, what if it was the other guy's move here already, is very useful because then you think, what's the other guy's threat? On the other hand, if you're in a very simplified position like an endgame, thinking about what if it was the other guy's move, the answer might be he doesn't have any good moves, and so I can take my time and slow play this position. Or best of all, what if not only he doesn't have any good moves, but all his moves are bad? He might actually be in Zugzwang here, in which case I can try to, for example, triangulate to reach the exact same position, but have it be his move. I mean, if you've got like let's say a pawn endgame or something, it's not that unusual that you might triangulate and literally just pass artificially. I don't mean literally, of course, which is illegal, but artificially pass through triangulation, make it the other person's move, then they have no moves. They're in Zugzwang and they lose. So this sort of null move hypothesis, just thinking, what if it was already the other guy's move here, is sort of a productive question you can ask yourself um, during a game, or just a productive way of thinking about positions in general, even if you're not in a game, and if you're just like analyzing a position or something. So that was the essence of the article. Yeah, I mean, of course, I didn't invent any of these concepts. Of course, I didn't invent Zugzwang or proofful access or thinking about the opponent's threat. But that was the null move hypothesis was just my catchy little name I came up with to kind of connect those concepts.
It's basically where you play sort of like a nothing move or a waiting move because your opponent has nothing. There's no need for you to force something that would allow him to get back into the game.
Yeah, that's one outcome of it for sure. But I mean, even if you're not going to play a nothing move, even if the null move hypothesis leads you to identify an actual threat that the opponent has against you, then it's still useful. I mean, it's no different than just seeing what the opponent's threat is. So I mean, it's a little bit of a catch-all for a few different types of scenarios. Yeah, one of them is like you just said. Yeah.
Now, what if you're facing a position where your opponent, he's not quite in Zugzwang or anything like that, but it's just a very complicated position and you're not sure what to do. And you're not seeing the right plan, but rather than force something, you play just a very tame move as if to say to your opponent, I think we both know, we both don't know what's going on. So I'm just going to pass it to you. Is that too risky, or what do you think of that?
That's an interesting situation. I mean, I think there are potential downsides to sort of making it obvious to your opponent that you're not sure, that you're not confident. I mean, sometimes that can give your opponent more confidence and then they feel like they smell blood. On the other hand, it can be a fake tell. You could do it on purpose to try to bait your opponent into getting overconfident and overpressing against you. If you feel like you sort of trick them with your nothing move, you make it seem like you're not confident, but in fact, if they overpress, it could hurt them. I mean, I don't know.
That second thing, what you just said, where you sort of like kind of Scooby-Doo them into forcing something, I find that works very, very well at the amateur level. I call them waiting moves. I actually did an episode on that where, like I said, it's a little risky, but it's almost like, I know you play it confidently. It's like this nothing move. Like you have no idea what you're doing, not no idea what you're doing, but it's one of those positions it's very hard to come up with a plan. None of your pawn breaks are working. You just don't know what to do. So rather than force something, you just like shuffle a rook or shuffle a bishop or just make like a, H3 or A3, as long as it doesn't weaken anything. And then a lot of players, like basically what you said, that second thing, a lot of players will try to force something. And then for the smarter players, they won't. And then it can become like a game of chicken. And it's an interesting dynamic. But at the amateur level, at like, let's say the under 2000 level, that can be a very effective tool when used judiciously, I think.
No, I think that it extends up to the master level and beyond. I mean, the higher level you get, I mean, overall, the fewer mistakes you're making compared to a club level player. And so a lot of times you'll see games between masters where nobody's done anything wrong. They're just kind of circling each other, around the ring, with each other and trying to probe here or there, see who's going to try to go for it first. So yeah, I actually think this situation you're describing probably happens on all levels to a certain extent. So yeah.
Couple more things I'd like to talk about.
Yeah.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about your chess teaching, like the types of things you do with your students, your approach, any common errors, just basically anything instructive you think you could share as a chess coach.
Yeah. So I work with more adults than kids in my teaching. Maybe 60 or 70% of my students are adults. Now, I also teach like group classes, like school classes for kids. But in terms of my private teaching, I work with more adults than kids. And but with kids and adults, some of the main things I do in my lessons with them is I, try to make sure that they are playing serious games and analyzing those games with some regularity. So getting them to practice this methodology of analyzing your games. And so as we're building that skill, in each lesson, I'm looking at, let's say, the three Lichess Rapid games they played that week, or the three over the board tournament games they played that week, or whatever. And not only are we looking at the games, but we're looking at their analysis that they did of the games. And I'm making sure that their notes are effective and efficient, as I advocate. And so, yeah, looking at their games and their analysis is one component of it. With the majority of my students, I assign them homework each week, or just like each lesson, in the form of puzzles to solve. And I use a few different sources for these puzzles. I think when I talked to you last, I was talking a lot about this Jeff Coakley's books, Winning Chess Exercises for Kids, and he has a couple other books as well. I still do use that book, but yeah, in the past year or so, I've started to use a lot more the steps method series of workbooks, this Dutch curriculum that is like 25, 30 books that covers roughly the same difficulty range as that Blue Coakley book, but at a much slower pace. I mean, instead of 1,000 puzzles that cover the difficulty of, let's say 1,000 to 2,000 USCF, it's like, it's 30 books that cover that range. So each book is a much narrower range. But, I've also found that these steps method books have a lot of more different kinds of exercises than in the Blue Coakley book. So I find it's a more diverse, interesting mix of stuff in these. I've known about the steps method for a long time, but I've just only started exploring it seriously in the past year. And I've been enjoying it a lot with my students. They feel like they get a lot out of it too. Anyway, so checking and assigning and checking the homework puzzles is a big component of what I do. And then basically the goal is to get both of those cylinders firing regularly, consistently, where the students are playing serious games consistently, analyzing them in a efficient way, and getting good takeaways from the games, doing puzzles regularly, getting my feedback on how they're doing on the puzzles. Ideally, each of those components maybe would only take 10, 15 minutes of a 1 hour lesson. And then with the remaining half or 2/3 of the lesson, we can do some more kind of fun, interesting, stimulating stuff. That includes, I do blindfold exercises with a lot of my students, visualization exercises, where I give them a puzzle to solve that's written out in notation. They're not looking at it, they're solving it in their head. Like white came on C6, black came on C8, white rook on G1, mate in one. The answer is rook G8 mate, something like that would be an easy example. Like I said earlier, playing training games against my students directly is also something I do a lot of. Not necessarily a normal game from the normal starting position, but like, let's say I give them a position from a Bobby Fischer game, and I let them choose which side they want to play, which side they think is the winning side, or just which side they prefer. Then we play a game from that position, and we analyze, we talk about the game after, we look at the Bobby Fischer game, how he played it different, something like that. So those are some more sort of fun, stimulating things that I do with my students once they've got some of the other basic ongoing components nice and solid. That's not an exhaustive list of everything I do with my students, but those are some of the big common things I do with a lot of my students.
Do you kind of let them play whatever openings they want? Do you steer them towards certain openings? What's your approach towards that?
Yeah, if my students never ask me about openings, I never bring it up, because I honestly don't care what openings they play. If they want to play the King's Indian, if they want to play the Najdorf, if they want to play the Levy-Rosman repertoire, Caro Kann, if they want to play 1B3, or if they want to play mainline D4, C4, or if they want to play the Smith Mora. I mean, these are all totally radically different opening approaches. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of that. I don't have a problem with any of that. They play whatever they want. If they want to switch around openings without knowing what they're doing and make it up as they go along, I don't care about that either. That's fine. If they want to play the same stupid, Queen's Indian or reverse Queen's Indian in every game for 20 years, that's fine too. I don't care. However, if they do ask me about openings, I'm happy to talk with them about openings. If they're feeling unsatisfied with their openings, I'm happy to, make recommendations about other things they could consider doing. I mean, many people have come to me saying, I don't feel comfortable against D4. I'm comfortable with my Levy Rosman Caro Khan, but against D4, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't like the Queen's Gambit, or I don't like the Slav, or the whatever, What do you recommend? What do you think I should do? And so, for a lot of those people, I recommend the Tourist defense. I wrote this article series on it, which I think we talked about last time. And, I mean, I still believe that it's a good opening for club players. So I mean, I could recommend that to them. So, I'll talk about openings with my students if they want, but if they don't bring it up, I don't bring it up, because overall, I don't feel like that's the most important thing for them to be working on. If they're uncomfortable, if they're unhappy with their openings, then okay, we'll change it. We'll change it for psychological reasons. We'll make them feel more comfortable, happy, more looking forward to playing chess. But unless there's a problem, then I don't think you need to focus very much on the opening, because it's not ultimately what's determining the results of your games most of the time. For a club player, the lowest hanging fruit is tactics, calculation, just playing regularly, experience for a lot of people. Those are some of the big things. Those are the most important things to work on rather than openings. So
I want to keep you for one more segment. You mentioned before you were reading some books that you've been enjoying, so I thought maybe you could share that with us to close this out.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of the books that I've been reading recently. First of all, Nigel Short's book Winning, I really enjoyed a lot. It came out like maybe a couple of years ago. Enjoyed that a lot. Highly recommended. I have no comment on Nigel Short as a person, but the book is really good. It's a really good book. And just recently, Magnus Carlsen published a book, Grind Like a Grandmaster, based on a Chessable course that he made.
Yeah, I saw that. It sounds very interesting.
And I didn't have the Chessable course, but I got the book. I'm reading it on my Kindle. It's terrific. Terrific. Love that book. Very good. I am very much like a grinder type of player, slow, steady, squeezy, water torture style, dry, boring. And for people who are into that, this book is just so much good stuff.
Oh, I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. Give me a king and pawn endgame where I have a slight advantage and I know it's just a matter of technique and I grind them down. I give me that any day of the week over some extremely sharp tactical position where if you make the slightest mistake, you're then losing. I love the grind.
I mean, to be honest, I consider it a weakness that I'm not as good at the sharp stuff. I feel like it's a crutch that I'm good at the grinding, because then I can avoid the stuff I'm not good at. I mean, this is the case with any kind of strength and weakness,
But Alex, I've heard many titled players, NM and above, many have said that they're not that strong at tactics. I mean, I've heard that. Many have said that. And they're not, I don't think it's like a false modesty thing. I've heard that before because, everything, tactics, everything's tactics. It's all about tactics. I've heard NMs, IMs, I mean, maybe even a GM or two say that, tactics is probably not my strongest suit, and yet they're titled.
Well, I guess there's levels. It's all relative, I mean, I think at any level, there are people who prefer more wild tactical positions, and then there are people who prefer the more boring stuff. So you and I are not at the same level, but we're definitely on that side of the boring versus exciting spectrum, So
yeah, I got you. Okay. So Alex, this was terrific. Really enjoyed the conversation. Some very useful, very practical tips. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Neil. Thanks for having me again, man. I enjoyed it, so appreciate it.
Absolutely. Now, any aspirations for IM and beyond?
Yes. Well, somebody said, once my second daughter was born, somebody said, okay, once you had your first kid, you made FM. And so now that you have the second kid, now it's just a matter of time before you make IM. So we'll see whether that proves true. You know, I mean, it took me 10 years to get to FM. So if it takes me 10 years to get to IM, I'm ready. I'm not going anywhere. So it's okay with me. In the meantime, I'm just grinding like a grandmaster, teaching, doing my steps method, you know, talking with you, having fun, enjoying chess. It's all good.
Great. And when you make IM, we'll have you back on a third time.
Beautiful. Absolutely.
There's always room for you. Great. So for those of you listening at home, I want to wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. We're recording this the week prior. Really appreciate you listening. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.